Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and we are here for my LTA Semifinals overview and analysis video in the winter playoffs. We are down to our final 4 teams, and it's a single elimination bracket. This is like a true semifinals. It's not a lower bracket finals like we typically title the semifinals in other regions. We just talked about this with the LCK. This is a genuine, like, 4 teams left, 2 will be winning, and 2 will be going on to the final. So I'm excited to talk about it, of course. You know, if you want to know my thoughts on the LTA round number 1 for the winter playoffs, you can check out that video up in the iCard, but, you know, I think you probably know what my thoughts on a lot of those series were. This is really, unfortunately, in terms of how the format goes, where a lot of the interesting games end up starting, where a lot of the interesting matchups end up starting, and so I'm excited to go over it. I hope you guys are as well. If you are, let me know down in the comment section below. Always curious to hear you guys' thoughts and opinions. We will be talking, of course, about everything today, and we will be previewing the finals, but I really am always curious to hear how you guys agree or disagree with a lot of the takes that I put out in these videos. And so let me know what your thoughts and opinions are, not only on the games, but on my takes down in the comment section below. But with that being said, I don't want to waste you guys' time too much. We've got 2 best of 3s. Yes, best of 3s. I'm still frustrated by that to get into in today's video. So without further ado, let's get into it. If you are new here, what we are going to do is go game by game in both of the series, talking about the advantages and the disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the game and a dud of the game for each individual game that we cover, and at the end of each series, I will be giving a player of the series to tie everything into a nice, neat little bow. We will be previewing the finals. Of course, at the end of this, whoever wins the finals will be going on to represent LTA at the First Stand tournament, the first big international tournament in the winter split here, so a lot on the line, and honestly, there are a lot of really fun storylines going into these semifinals matchups, so I'm excited to talk about it. Let's get into it. Let's get into our first series, which to me is arguably the more interesting of the 2. I definitely think both of these teams are, you know, kind of looking real good right now. I think one of these teams was expected to be really dominant. The other, you know, kind of surprisingly has been really dominant. It's, of course, a matchup between the number 1 seeded 100 Thieves and the number 3 seeded FlyQuest. It's weird how the bracket ended up working out like this, but alas, here we are. Number 1 is taking on number 3, and this is a really interesting matchup on paper because despite being the number 1 seed, 100 Thieves are definitely looked at as the underdog here. The domestic season, if you will, the qualification process for this tournament was so short and it was so compact that it's really difficult to really get a grasp of how good any team was coming out of that stage. It was such a small sample size that you didn't want to make too many large assertions, but of course 100 Thieves coming out of that undefeated in terms of the series record. They do take down a team like Team Liquid. They do take down a team like Cloud9 in a best of 1, which was obviously pretty ginormous for them. Like, they looked really good, but they have not yet taken down FlyQuest, who, yes, has lost a best of 3. They lost that best of 3 to Cloud9 domestically, but there is a reason to believe that this team just wasn't necessarily clicking on all cylinders, we'll just say, in that series, and best of 3s are already pretty finicky as it is. Generally speaking, it's always a little bit tricky to kind of get an idea of where teams are landing at the start of every single year. I think there is a reason that FlyQuest is not only going into this series as favorites, but going into the rest of this tournament as the favorite. You know, people kind of still expecting FlyQuest to be able to move on and represent North America and the League of the Americas now at First Stand, and I think a lot of that just has to do with their roster on paper. Because we've had so little games, people are still kind of leaning on their preseason analysis, and you know what? I'm doing the exact same thing. I think FlyQuest has looked excellent in their wins. It's really just been their 1 series loss where they've not looked, like, perfect, but even then, like, you can really point to a couple of mistakes in those games against Cloud9 that really dragged them down, rather than, like, Cloud9 just completely being better or being more talented or anything like that. Like, FlyQuest is still the team to beat in terms of reputation right now in the LTA, and I think they're coming into this series with that kind of momentum and that kind of confidence. I think the matchup is generally really positive for them. You know, Quid is the best player on 100 Thieves, and while I do think Quid is better than Quad personally, Quad is definitely the kind of mid laner that can survive against Quid. Mechanically speaking, they're very similar, and so I would imagine this isn't like this gigantic lead for 100 Thieves that they've been used to getting in the mid lane, especially early on in games that they can translate into, like, skirmishes around the map. FBI and Ayla have been excellent in the bot lane, and while I'm not going to sit here and say that I wouldn't expect them to be good here because I think it's totally possible and viable for them to be the better bot lane of these two, Masu and Busio are awesome. They are unbelievably strong and unbelievably good. It's a bit of a different challenge when you're going up against Masu and Busio, who are so good at playing both strong side and weak side. It's a very difficult matchup to deal with in draft, and I think that's what they create a lot of panic for on the other side of these matchups. If FBI can get going, I think that is obviously huge for 100 Thieves, but I'm not sure that's like a perfect matchup. Inspired is one of the few junglers that is just better than River, in my opinion, and I don't even need to tell you historically how the Sniper versus Whippo matchup has gone. Sniper has not necessarily fared particularly well when these two top laners play off against each other. It's not really looking like a solid matchup for 100 Thieves, which is why they are coming in as underdogs, but this team is undefeated in best of series so far in 2025. This entire year, they have yet to lose a single one. I get that it's only been, what, 3 best of 3s and a best of 1. It's not a large sample size or anything like that, but this team has just been able to come out and win. They are looking a lot better now that FBI is in the bot lane, now that they have a consistent AD carry that they can play for. I think Quid is, really stepping into being, top 1 territory in terms of players in the LTA. If Sniper and Ayla can be good enough to be able to neutralize their opponents on the other side of this and allow their carries to be able to dominate in the mid to late game, then yeah, I could see 100 Thieves coming out on top of this. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility. I do think this is the closer, in my opinion, of the two series, but FlyQuest is going in as favorites, and there's been a lot of discussion about this. I think it's rightfully so. I think it's hard to count out FlyQuest in big moments until they prove they're not going to show up in big moments, and so I guess the only way to know how this series ends up going is, of course, to go game by game, and that means starting with game number 1. So let's go ahead and get into it. The winner of game number 1 was FlyQuest. They are going to take game number 1. They're going to go up in this series 1-0. Game number 1 is obviously the most important game of a best of 3, and it's not particularly close. Having to win both of the last 2 games is a lot more difficult than just having to win one of the last 2 games. That should be, a remotely obvious. Like, that's a pretty stock standard take there, I guess. But overall, I think just the way that FlyQuest ended up controlling this map and winning it and really dominating this game, not really looking all that pressed, it does kind of play into the fact that FlyQuest is coming in as major favorites, as the defending LTA champions from the summer split. It looks like they are kind of following up on that reputation, at least at the start here. 100 Thieves just didn't really have an answer to Fly's draft. They themselves end up drafting something that I think is rather predictable in terms of how they want to play a lot of these fights. The Corki is just way too important in this game for their comp in order for this, team to roll. That as long as FlyQuest was putting resources into making sure that bot lane 2v2 was not getting out of control, and Masu and Busio were definitely the better bot lane in this game, then 100 Thieves were always going to have a hard time winning. Jace has not really performed all that well statistically in a lot of the major regions right now. I talked about that in my LCK video. It's really shocking because I think Jace is mega broken, and so to see him constantly be losing matchups that I just think are positive for him, it's weird. I actually think this is one of the weaker Jace drafts in general. Like, I think FlyQuest has a really good comp to play into Jace. I don't think Sylas really has the tools to be able to take over in the same kind of way that you would normally see from a Sylas game here. Again, a lot of it is on Corki when you look at this draft for 100 Thieves, and, FBI just got really far behind. For FlyQuest, you had a lot of different outs. I think you scale a lot better into the late game. You have a lot of ways to win 5v5s down the stretch, or you can pull them apart and win through like macro. I think you have a lot of ways to split push throughout this game. With the Cassante, with the Azir, with the Varus, who I think really kind of enables that playstyle a lot more than he gets credit for. And you have engage tools. It's not like you don't have, Vi ult onto the backline or Azir trying to front to back, right? Like, you have ways to be able to win multiple ways. But really the big advantage here was just the lane differences in top and bot lane. That's really where the gigantic leads ended up coming in for FlyQuest. Player of the game for me is going to go to Bwipo in the top lane. I just don't know how I could give it to anybody else. I love how Masu and Busio ended up playing this game, and I thought that they were excellent. We'll talk about the bot lane when we get there, because there is a lot to praise them for, but I've been guilty on this channel sometimes of maybe underselling the value of Bwipo for FlyQuest here, and I really don't want to do that in this game. I think this was just one of those performances where you look at it and you go, yeah, that's a pretty standard Bwipo win, but like a standard Bwipo win is him just absolutely dumpstering Sniper on the top side, playing Cassante into Jace, just being way more useful, being able to translate that significantly more into the late game. Like, just a really good game from Bwipo. This guy is like the heart and soul of FlyQuest, as we all know, and sometimes I feel like I fail to capture that in these videos. I fail to capture just how important his playstyle and his, laning ability in particular, his ability to have gold leads basically no matter what going into the mid game, how important that has been towards FlyQuest success, and I really wanted to highlight here. But Masu and Busio have, of course, also been excellent. FBI and Ayla have been on fire, basically unstoppable as a bot lane 2v2, and 100 Thieves know that, and that's why they're playing for them in this game, and yet Masu and Busio come out and are just by far the better of these bot lane duos. Busio really kind of deserves player of the game. I think if Whippo had had a slightly less, dominant performance on the top side, I probably would have given it to Busio. This was an awesome, awesome Braum game. That champion continues to look really good. Masu was excellent on Varus. Most people are considering him the best AD carry in the game right now. I would tend to agree. I certainly think in terms of consistency, he's right up there. Ashe is still in a really good spot on the patch that they are playing on, but Masu is in excellent form, and Varus just does so much to enable champions like Cassante to be able to run the game elsewhere, because Varus is just so flexible in terms of how you can play him in the mid to late game. I thought Quad and Inspired were really good as well. Inspired had some really great setups on the Vi. For the most part, they weren't the main characters. Whippo winning individually on the top side, and then Masu and Busio winning individually in the 2v2, I think were just kind of the gigantic leads that FlyQuest needed in order to get across the finish line. But overall, 100 Thieves just didn't have the firepower to be able to overcome what I would consider to be a little bit of a one-dimensional draft. And that's, I guess, kind of the narrative that we're going to talk about with this, is you're just relying way too much on FBI. FBI has been excellent, but this was just a game where he wasn't going to dominate. And if he's not going to dominate in this comp, nobody else is going to be able to dominate. I don't think Sylas can take over this game. Jace certainly can't take over this game. And, Sedge and Rel are there to set things up. This is really all up to the Corki to be able to win that 2v2 early and use that to try and win skirmishes in the mid game. It just never happened. FBI is going to get dud of the game for me. He was way too important to this comp to not have as good of a game as he did. He participated in 1 kill across this game. His damage numbers were horrific, like just not very good. This is probably his worst game of 2025. It's okay. Like, it happens every once in a while. Like, FBI is not a perfect player. We've talked about that on the channel. He's not like an A+ berserker caliber mechanical like god or anything in that zone. He's going to have games where he is just outplayed. You just would kind of hope that the rest of the team would be able to do something about it, and they really couldn't here. Alo was not very good on the Rel. Busio mega support gapped him in terms of relevance in this game. Sniper got completely destroyed on the top side. Like, this was kind of what we expected. Top side was always a concern for me when it came to 100 Thieves facing off against actually good teams more consistently. And even like River and Quid couldn't salvage this. River was not the problem here, although he wasn't really the solution. Not that he could do much on the Sejuani. I'm not blaming River. He was probably the one with the least amount of blame, and Quid was just trying to play. He was just trying to do anything he could on the Sylas, but this is a very difficult game for Sylas to be able to take over in. He is not the main character of this 100 Thieves draft, and so you end up in this situation where you fall behind early and there's really no way to come back because their ability to play the map and their ability to fight over objectives is just kind of better than yours. So 100 Thieves now down 1-0. They've got to be able to bounce back. If they don't come out in game number 2 and look, at least a little bit better, it's over. Like, this is a best of 3. This is not a best of 5. If you lose the first 2 games, you're done. You're dusted. You're out of the tournament. And so they need to come out and obviously win that game number 2. But FlyQuest would love, love, love to get this thing done early. They would love to take this home in 2, and they would love to move on to the finals. Are they going to be able to close it out, or will 100 Thieves be able to survive? Well, the winner of game number 2 was 100 Thieves. They are going to take game number 2. They're going to even up the series at 1 apiece, and at the very least, we're going to a game number 3, a much, much better game from 100 Thieves here. It really did feel like they had a lot of tools in their toolbox to be able to come back and win this. I think that they have a lot of playmaking potential with this draft. I like this draft significantly more. For FlyQuest, I think they just kind of lost sight of their own individual goal. I think you have a pretty easy to execute draft here if you really want to do that. I think you have a lot of different ways to be able to force fights onto these members of 100 Thieves that really want to try to split you apart, that want to try to get picks, that want to try to scale this game out of control with gold on Kai'Sa and gold on Akali, want to try to make things as hard as possible for the Ezreal to be able to take over, or really the Yone or the Zyra as well. It just didn't end up working out that way. You ended up losing the fights that mattered the most, which I really was not expecting throughout a lot of this. I just don't look at this draft and say, oh yeah, 100 Thieves should be the one that's getting every single major neutral objective in the game. Both Elders, Otacon, all of it. Like, that's not really what I thought was going to happen in this, although I do think the scaling on 100 Thieves is really undervalued in terms of the comp here. Obviously, Kai'Sa getting out of control makes things a lot more difficult, but Gnar is a very, very hard champion for FlyQuest's comp to deal with in the later half of the game, because I think they are eventually just going to run into a damage problem. I don't love Ezreal in this draft. draft in particular, I think you just needed more damage coming out of that bot lane, and honestly, that kind of, turned out to be true. Maybe some of that would have been supplemented if Quad was a human being in this game, but, we'll talk about that when we get there. For 100 Thieves, player of the game for me is gonna go to Sniper on the top side. I honestly do think the Gnar was the most relevant champion in the game, although I think you could give it to any of the three carries here, Sniper, Quid, or FBI. It should go to one of those three. All three of them had excellent games. I think Sniper had the most, interesting moments, and I think it really is awesome to see him step up in a moment where he needs to, because he was so bad in the playoffs last year for this team, and they kind of won in spite of him. I was starting to get concerned that maybe he was going to be a player that wasn't as good in the big moments, or just generally, didn't have the skill level to be able to compete with, the best top laners in the West, but this is the kind of performance that you need to have if you're going to be the #1 team in the LTA, and I think I was just really happy to see that come out of Sniper. We saw flashes of this, especially in the spring split last year, but we just didn't see any extended periods, and that kind of fell away in summer. This was the performance he needed to have on Gnar to be able to kind of prove that he can still do it. Quid and FBI were excellent. Quid mega gapped Quad in the mid lane here. Really like the Akali pick. I think it really does pull apart everything FlyQuest wants to do. It turns this from a comp that wants to play around Kai'Sa and try to set her up with the Xin Zhao early to a comp that can kill you anytime, any place from basically any range. You have to be so scared if you're FlyQuest walking into basically anything. And yes, you have some safety tools here with the Ezreal, and obviously, generally speaking, Leona and Sion are not necessarily going to be in a ridiculous amount of danger, but this Akali, I think, really does change the complexion for what a lot of 100 Thieves want to do, and that's why I wasn't as much of a fan of the Ezreal, because I just don't know if you have enough damage to be able to match that. Plus a Kai'Sa, where FBI was just playing so aggro. I think he looked at game #1 and saw that he was the win condition, saw that he wasn't really able to do anything because the 2v2 wasn't going his way, and just said, screw that, I'm going to play Kai'Sa, I'm going to be the most aggressive, greedy player on the entire Rift, and that's the thing that has gotten FBI to where he has been at so far this year, where he has been the #1 AD carry in terms of performance so far in 2025, is that aggressiveness, that, greediness to go out and say, I can 1v1 you, I can 1v2 a lot of these situations. I'm going to try and trade to get gold onto my champion. That's what you want to see out of an AD carry in this current meta, because you do want them to get hyper accelerated, even if it does mean giving some gold over to the enemy team. So Sniper, Quid, FBI, all better than their counterparts, specifically the solo laners. Sniper and Quid were just so much better than their counterparts. FBI was good, not at the expense of Masu or Busio. He was just really good in this game, but a pretty big top and mid gap, which is huge for 100 Thieves. Of course, River and Alo were good as well as facilitators. River in particular, I think, did a really great job in the mid game to be able to keep 100 Thieves from, losing out on a lot of these big skirmishes. He actually did a lot of really great work on that R5 Xin Zhao. Not usually in love with the pick, but it really worked out here. Overall, just like 100 Thieves draft, I think that they have a lot of options, and I think they executed it well. And for Fly, I don't think they had a real answer to the Kai'Sa plus Gnar. They just didn't really have any way to win these 5v5s that they wanted to take. You have a lot of engaged tools, obviously. You have Yone, you've got Leona, you've got a lot of go buttons. That's what I like to call them on this channel, and you just don't really have anyone to go on, or you don't have any way to capitalize on the go buttons, because you are kind of lacking in damage outside of the Zyra, if the Zyra does end up getting super fed, which obviously didn't happen in this game. Now, the elephant in the room, the big problem for FlyQuest was that their solo laners got completely outplayed. Bwipo was not relevant on the Sion, although how much of that was Bwipo trying to play Sion this way, I think it's kind of up to your call. The scoreline is pretty indicative of him playing Sion. Even when he wins, his scoreline looks pretty bad, but Quad just was useless. He had a horrible game in the mid lane. He's an easy choice for dead of the game on the Yone. If he had played like a human being in this game, I think FlyQuest has a much better shot at actually being able to win. The Yone is pretty relevant to this comp overall, and even if I don't love Yone into Akali, I don't really love Sion into Gnar. These aren't matchups that I would expect, on their own for FlyQuest to be able to win, especially with Xin Zhao on the other side of this matchup. You still need to be able to survive so that you can be semi-useful in the later half of the game around these Otacon fights, around these Elder fights, and it just didn't really end up happening. Quad was nothing in this one, and I kind of have planted my flag on this channel that I'm Team Quid over Team Quad. I've said that for a while. I was saying that throughout all of last year. I've always been a little bit against Quad, and this is unfortunately the kind of performance that does kind of justify that take a little bit. I don't think he's a horrible player, but he has to step up in these big moments, and he didn't quite do that here. Inspired wasn't really all that relevant. The Zyra needed to be a lot more important, we'll just say, on this game overall. And obviously, I'm not blaming the bot lane, but again, I wouldn't have picked Ezreal here. I just think you needed something a little bit more, we'll just say more, in the bot lane. I don't think Ezreal was the answer, in my opinion. I think Kai'Sa was in a really good spot to be able to win a lot of this game, even if Ezreal and Leona are going to have more prio in the 2v2 than what FlyQuest, or I guess what 100 Thieves had in the previous game. Like, I don't know. It's not what I would have picked in this spot, but for FlyQuest, it's only 1-1. You've already shown that you can outskill and beat this team. 100 Thieves has now also shown that they can outskill and beat you. You know, this is a big game number 3. The winner of this is going to be going on to the finals, and I think there is a real conversation to be had about the winner of this just being the favorite to win the finals regardless of who comes out from the other series. I think that that is a perfectly valid way to look at this, and so a pretty gigantic game number 3 for both of these teams. Who's going to be able to take it? Well, the winner of game number 3 was 100 Thieves. They are going to take game number 3. They're going to take this series 2-1, and they're going to be moving on to the finals. The number 1 seed is genuine, and they are showing up here today. They have taken down FlyQuest. They have now beaten all 3 of the big 3, like, other teams in North America right now. Of course, the Cloud9 series was just in a best of 1, and so it's not exactly the most, like, dominant victory ever, but they've beaten Team Liquid in a best of 3. They've beaten FlyQuest in a best of 3. This team is legit. You can't say anything else at this point. They are playing as well as they could possibly play at the moment, and I do think that they executed this game just better. This was an execution diff versus FlyQuest, even if I think this game was really fun. For Fly on the other side, I think they tried their best. I think if they had had a slightly better top lane performance coming out here from Bwipo, they probably have a chance to be able to win this, but the Garen really did kind of throw the game away. I'm not going to try and sit here and, you know, rag on Bwipo too much, because I don't really like to rag on one player and say it's like, oh, it's your fault for losing the series or anything, but this was a very winnable game, and the only reason they weren't able to win a lot of the fights around Grubs and around Otacon was because this Garen was just not particularly relevant, and I think that that was a pretty major problem. So obviously, we'll talk about that moving forward, but let's praise 100 Thieves first and foremost, because this team is legit. They are right now the team to beat in the LTA, and I think that that's a really fun statement, and a lot of that is just the overperformance of players that maybe weren't showing this level of skill last year. Player of the game and player of the series for me as a whole is going to go to Ayla in the support position. I think I was maybe underselling Ayla in the game to win. I talked up FBI and Quid and Sniper a lot. I talked about how they were the 3 like dominant carries, but they needed people to facilitate them. Ayla was really good in game number 2, and I think he was amazing in game 3 here on the Alistar. He really was kind of the game changer for 100 Thieves when they needed it the most. And you know what? I'm so happy to see Ayla succeeding. This guy has a really good track record. I think like a deceptively good track record. People remember that FlyQuest year or even 100 Thieves last year, and they're just like, oh, he's always been a bad player at this level. But you know what? He's always winning at this level, and he was awesome as a tier 2 player. He was dominating with Jan on that Team Liquid Academy team for so many years. You know, him versus Busio was always a big rivalry because they came up together, because they were always linked together, and, you know, I thought Ayla was going to be the better of those 2 supports. Obviously, things have not necessarily turned out that way historically speaking, but at least in this series, that was the case. Ayla, you know, goes to FlyQuest, has to jump into a team like 8 or 9 weeks into the middle of the season and become their primary shot caller. That's not a great situation for him. He goes to Evil Geniuses, and that team is like randomly top 3 in the regular season. People forget about that with Jojo Pune and Unforgiven, like that version of the roster. He goes over to 100 Thieves, and that team overperforms in the spring split and ends up overperforming and getting to Worlds, and he's a big piece for that. He's playing some of the best mechanical league that he's played so far this year. Like, I think this guy's resume is a lot better than people remember it being, and generally speaking, I think Ayla is just able to get the most out of himself when he's playing with a player like FBI that's going to be a lot more aggressive. It's why he was so good with Jan for so many years in the Team Liquid system, because I think he does need that more aggro AD carry to get the most out of his playstyle, but he was awesome in this series, and he continues to be great in these best ofs. Like, best of 1s I don't think are super favorable to Ayla, but best of 3s and best of 5s, I think that's where Ayla is going to shine individually as a player, and we kind of saw that here. Of course, FBI was great on the Misfortune. This isn't even that great of a Misfortune game. I think Jhin is generally a very strong pick into MF. I think they should have prio early, 100 Thieves that is. They should have prio early, but I don't really see a circumstance where MF has like an easy path to be able to ult in late game team fights, with Pantheon basically having a point and click, with that being like a free Orianna Shockwave if she wants to put that off. Like, there's so many different ways for Misfortune to be interrupted in terms of these ultimates, and yet FBI was still super relevant in terms of the damage. I gotta give a huge, massive shout out to Sniper on the top side on this Jax. Fantastic performance, not only on the Jax, but throughout this entire series. I don't think Jax is like really that, like the R5 Garen honestly scared me. I was like, oh, it's gonna be one of those games where Blippo picks Garen, ends up getting this big lead in the top lane, and they just have no way to kill him unless Victor gets like super fed. No, Sniper won the 1v1 on the top side. He was more relevant on the Jax in a bad matchup, and yet still was able to move around. This was a fantastic series from Sniper. Again, basically everything you wanted to see. If you wanted to give player of the series to Sniper, I totally understand on that. River was good on the Maokai, and I thought Quid was going to have to do a lot of the heavy lifting on the Victor when I saw this draft, but nope, like, he didn't really have to do all that much. The only way that FlyQuest was ever going to be able to win this game was if they were winning the Void Grub and winning the Otacon fights and, like, being able to scale through their mid-game skirmishes. When that wasn't happening, when we were getting to these, like, 3v3s and these 4v4s and 100 Thieves was already winning those, this game was going to be a bit of a problem for FlyQuest to be able to come back in. So credit to 100 Thieves. They've done everything that they're supposed to. A lot of their players have leveled up. Ayla and Sniper, the players with the two biggest question marks, were the two best players in this series against FlyQuest, and they're going to be moving on to the finals. And then for Fly, this is a disappointing outcome. Like, honestly, I would have loved if this was a best of 5. I'm still incredibly salty about that. This format is just unreal. The fact that this is a best of 3 in the semifinals is genuinely absurd, and this game kind of proved that this should be going longer than 3 games, but it's not. It's a best of 3. You needed to come out here and win this, and while I do think you have a pretty straightforward comp, again, very similar to 100 Thieves, just a lot of engage, a lot of setup tools to be able to try and make things easier on you for team fights in the later half of the game. I don't think your team fight is as strong as 100 Thieves. I think your skirmishing is better than 100 Thieves. I think that's where you needed to be able to try and separate yourself, and again, losing on the top side, having Blippo be such a negative, it just completely takes away that win condition, which is the main one for FlyQuest, in my opinion, in this game. Blippo is obvious choice for dead of the game in game number 3. This just was not good enough. The Garen on R5 was in a really great position in draft to be able to be a big problem for 100 Thieves to have to deal with, and he was useless. Like, he just was not relevant throughout any part of this game. I don't think Inspired played particularly well in the Pantheon. I'm not really all that surprised by that. This doesn't really feel like a champion that FlyQuest would have loved to draft. I'm honestly really surprised they went for Pantheon, but alas, like, they went for it. I think everybody else on the team was honestly fine. Masu had a really good game on Jhin. This is a really good Jhin draft, and I think generally this is the kind of draft that Jhin can take over in. It just didn't end up mattering. Like, Masu had a good game and no one cared. Quad was also really good on the Orianna, another situation where I can see Ori just having an easy time in the late game if you get there, but losing those skirmishes, again, I don't want to stress this, but like, this is the meta. This is the world we're living in. If you're not winning at Otacon, if you're not winning at Void Grubs, you're not winning the game. Like, it really is that simple in the current configuration. Busia was fine on the Bard, even if I don't love the Bard pick. But overall, like, FlyQuest was just supposed to be better than 100 Thieves. They were supposed to be able to come out and execute on this better, and this was just an execution diff in terms of this series. 100 Thieves was and is the better team, and I think they proved that here, and unfortunately for Fly, that means they're going out in the semifinals. They're not even making the finals as the defending LTA champs, LCS champs, whatever you want to call them, from last year. And 100 Thieves is, of course, going to be moving on to the finals. They'll take on the winner of the series we're going to cover in just a second, but congratulations to this team. I certainly did not see this coming, not only like going into this tournament, because I thought they were probably the 3rd best team in North America coming into this tournament, but certainly going into the year. I had them closer to being like where Shopify Rebellion was at in my preseason power rankings than I had them to beating FlyQuest, right? This is a massive overperformance and a massive upgrade for this team, but at some point we have to stop calling them underdogs. I think they have proven beyond a shadow of a doubt at this point that they are a team that has to be taken seriously. But then moving on now to our second of the semifinal series, and this one to me was less interesting on paper, but who knows? Like, both of these teams have really good track records. Historically, both of these orgs have good track records, and honestly, like, anything can happen in the LTA right now within the top 4. It's the number 2 seeded Cloud9 taking on the number 4 seeded Team Liquid. I've been very vocal on this channel about how I think Team Liquid has looked like the worst of the top 3 teams so far in 2025, mostly because has just really struggled to get out to any sort of consistent lead in any game. He's, in one of those stretches where he's not particularly good. Has always been a very streaky player going back to his time in the LCK. He's either playing really well or he's playing really poor. There's really not a lot of in-between when it comes to him, and unfortunately right now it just feels like you're getting a little bit more of one of those negative performances than you are some of the positive ones, and that's why I've been a little bit lower on Team Liquid, but this is still Team Liquid. This is the team that kind of dominated North America for most of last year. They won the spring split, maybe shockingly, won the spring split as the number 5 seed, and then, went out and went undefeated in the regular season in summer, coming off of a pretty decent MSI showing. They go into the playoffs as like the full-blown #1 seed, mega favorites. They get upset in the finals by FlyQuest. They go on to Worlds and they do fine. They almost make it out of the group stage. They don't quite get there, but you know, like Team Liquid is still a team that you can expect to be near the top of the North American leaderboards, even if they're not in the best form that they've ever been in right now. I'm just a little bit concerned about the middle of the map, and honestly, I just think Cloud9 has gotten a ton better from last year, or at least a ton more consistent from what they were last year. I got a lot of comments in the offseason that I honestly was pretty surprised by, that, you know, people were saying like, oh, you know, Cloud9 was 4th last year in summer, you know, in terms of their playoff standing at the very least, and then they lost Jojo, Pune, and Berserker. Why would you expect them to get better? And I think it's kind of missing the point for Cloud9, at least a little bit in my opinion, or I would definitely push back on that narrative. First of all, Cloud9 was not the 4th best team in North America last year. They were better than 100 Thieves last year. They lost one best of 5 to 100 Thieves in a series that they absolutely should have won, and they just didn't. They didn't show up on the day, but this team almost went undefeated in the regular season. They only lost to Team Liquid. They beat FlyQuest in a best of 3 in the regular season. Like, there is a real argument to be made that this was a top 3 team last year, and it just didn't end up working out. But also, that team had negative synergy, negative chemistry. It was too many cooks, too many mouths to feed. Blabber, Jojo, and Berserker were just not all going to get the resources they needed to get in order to take over. Thanatos needs resources as well on the top side. It was just one of those cases where I think the team was built pretty improperly, and even though you might be downgrading in terms of skill level in both mid lane and bot lane, which I do think you are, you might be upgrading in terms of the consistency and the ability to play towards your actual star players, in this case Blabber and, you know, Thanatos, I think, on the top side of the map. And so I thought Cloud9 was going to get a lot better going into 2025, and you know what? They have. They beat FlyQuest in a best of 3 to qualify to be a top 2 seed here. Yes, they lost a best of 1 to 100 Thieves, but it's a best of 1, and 100 Thieves looks great right now. Cloud9 is definitely the favorite going into this series, and I think they should be the favorite going into this series. I have them favored going into this series. I think they should be the better of these two teams. If they lose this, I think they're going to be pretty disappointed, but again, Team Liquid is one of those, you know, groups of 5 players that does tend to show up in big moments. So really excited to see where this ends up going. The only way to know is, of course, to go game by game, so let's kick it off. Let's start with game number 1, because the winner of game number 1 was Team Liquid. They are going to take the first game in this series. They're going to go up 1-0. This is a great way to start off. This is exactly how you wanted to kick off this series. You want to be able to take control of it and immediately put Cloud9 on the back foot. Obviously, you know, Cloud9 can win 2 games in a row. We just saw 100 Thieves win 2 games in a row on the upper side of this bracket, but it's a lot more difficult to win 2 than it is to win 1. That is definitely the case. Doubly so, if we're being statistically accurate. So, big win here for Team Liquid, and this is exactly what you wanted to see. You wanted to see them draft a pretty stock standard win condition. You have a lot of late game threats here for TL, and I think specifically in North America, maybe not just specifically in North America, but like definitely in North America, drafting these late game outs and these win conditions that are going to be super good at 30 minutes, like that's a pretty darn good strategy right now. It's definitely looking like it's pretty effective throughout a lot of the series that we've seen so far between these North American teams, and that once again was the case here. But for Cloud9, honestly, like I don't want to pin this on a couple of picks, but I think their draft started pretty interestingly. I like, you know, Kalista on B1, I think is fair. Sejuani and Bessa, like they are very consistent pieces on the top side, but I don't know how you round out this draft with Pantheon Azir, specifically the Azir. I'm not going to say that Loki single-handedly lost this game, because I think he individually played fine. Like, he was not the problem. Neither was Vulcan. I think both of them, you know, mechanically speaking, were, you know, relevant in this game and didn't necessarily cost Cloud9 in that way. But I think the Azir pick did really put this game, it made this game a lot more difficult, we'll just say, for Cloud9, because now all of a sudden this comp that really wants to try to win around Void Grubs, try to win around Otacon, you know, all of the things we talk about all the time, it's so much harder to do that when you're playing Azir and the enemy is playing Taliyah, and you're basically allowing her to go wherever she wants, whenever she wants to do it. I just don't really get the Azir pick here, and I think it's greed, but we'll talk about that when we get more into Cloud9. Let's talk about Team Liquid first and foremost. I really like this draft idea. You know, Skarner kind of looks like one of those picks that if a team leaves it up, you know, teams are going to snatch it. You know, B1, R1, you know, very early on in drafts, people still have a really high priority on Skarner, and I think we saw some of the benefits of that here, but it was the carry duo to me that stood out for Liquid. Yawn is going to get player of the game for me. If you wanted to give this to APA, I think that's entirely fair as well. Both of them I thought played really well in this game. APA had a much easier job on the Taliyah, which is why I'm not necessarily as, you know, dedicated to being like APA was dominant. I think picking Azir into Taliyah just allows Taliyah to do everything that she wants to do. Like, she is the prototypical shove and roam mid laner, and Azir can't really do anything about that, and so You know, APA was great, but I think his job was easier. Jan had to do a lot of damage in this game, and you know what? He did a lot of damage on the Corki. Sometimes, you know, Callista, Pantheon comes out on the other side, and you look at that and you go, well, all right, I guess I'm waiting around until I can be relevant. But if you do get relevant, if Jan starts getting gold, which he did, if he starts snowballing these fights out of control, which he did, now all of a sudden this is like a really, really good game for Corki, because they don't really have any easy way to be able to deal with this champion later on. His range is just basically undealable with. Your only forms of hard CC are the Sejuani and the Pantheon, of course, the Mbessa and Azir ultimates and things like that, like Callista ultimates. But like Corki's never going to be in range of any of those in the back half of this game. It's just going to be a really simple one for Jan to be able to close out, and he continues to look excellent. He is the best AD carry in North America, you know, as well as FBI is playing right now. I still think I would take Jan over basically anybody else, and this was just another confirming part of that. Core JJ was really good on the Nautilus. I think he's actually started off 2025 better than he's played in 2024. I know that that's a weird thing to say, but I was low on his 2024 tape when you were watching some of the individual mechanical plays that he was making. I think he's been a lot more aggressive this year, which I really like. Impact was very relevant on the Gangplank on the top side. The damage numbers look insane, and obviously he was going to create panic in side lanes if he was allowed to do so. was really good on the Skarner. Overall, this was just a solid game for Team Liquid. I think they understood their win condition better, and, you know, even if I don't hate, like, Cloud9's draft in total, I think Team Liquid was kind of gifted a free middle-of-the-map pressure advantage for the Taliyah, which I really like. I think Taliyah's underplayed in this meta. And then for Cloud9 on the other side, like, I just don't get the Azir. Like, I really, really do not get it. Loki played it fine, but this is one of those cases where it's like, pro player likes Azir, so we pick Azir. I just think this is a basic, again, a free pass for Team Liquid to be able to take for a lot of this mid game, and that's what they did. Like, Loki was fine. I'm not going to blame him too much. He's not getting dead of the game. Neither is Vulcan, even if I don't love the Pantheon support here. Sven is going to get dead of the game, because this Callista was just not useful, really, under any circumstance. Callista is one of those picks that either really works or really doesn't. She's good because she enables a lot of the good supports to be better, and that's, you know, kind of a really nice conduit to have. But Callista herself, especially if she doesn't have gold, which Sven did not have this game, is just not going to be all that valuable. Sven's not been a particularly good laner over the course of this year. If you look at the stats, I don't think Sven has ever been like a particularly phenomenal laner. He's just a very consistent piece that can win later. That's why I've always liked him as like a number 2 or a number 3 option on a good team. And unfortunately, the Callisto was not able to get that advantage that they drafted for in this game. So Sven is going to get dead of the game for me. I don't think Blabber played particularly well on the Sejuani. I don't think he was like miserably bad, but once again, you're just like surrendering so much pressure in the middle of the map playing Sej, Azir into Skarner, into Leah. And, you know, in this meta, on this map, with all of the new objectives, I just don't think you can get away with that. This is a gigantic mid-game power spike, you know, quote-unquote, like meta, and I just don't think you were able to capitalize on that. Thanatos was whatever on the top side. Like I said, Loki was not the problem. Vulcan was not the problem. I just think they put themselves in a pretty big hole that they didn't really need to put themselves in, and that's the case for this series as well. It's 1-0 now. You have to win both of the final 2 games in order to move on to the finals. Of course, Cloud9 can do it. We just saw 100 Thieves do it on the upper side, but it's certainly not a situation you want to be forced to do. This is a must-win game number 2 for them. They certainly do not want to get, you know, swept out of this semifinals, but Liquid looked a lot cleaner in this game. I don't think they looked perfect. I still think they had quite a few flaws, and they're still a little bit too aggressive in situations where they shouldn't be for my personal taste. I'm still worried about what happens between Umpty and Blabber when Blabber plays something that can actually take advantage of a jungle matchup early, but for now, Team Liquid's in an okay spot. They just have to be able to win 50% of the rest of this series. Are they going to be able to close it out in 2, or is Cloud9 going to be able to stay alive and push us to yet another game number 3? Well, the winner of game number 2 was Cloud9. They are going to take game number 2. They're going to even up the series at 1 apiece, and both of our semifinal series today are going to be going to a game number 3. Very exciting stuff here. Finally, we have a team that's drafting for early and mid-game skirmishes, that's drafting for playmaking abilities around a lot of these neutral objectives, and they actually win early. They actually go out and play super aggro and play super aggressive and try to get that big, you know, 3K gold lead at, you know, 17 minutes that they can just play out the rest of the game with. Team Liquid, which I don't blame them for, by the way, opt entirely into scaling here. They opt for Rumble, Victor, Zeri. They're like, screw this. Like, we're not playing early. We're not worrying about it. We're not going to think about it too much. We are going to try to play for these late game team fights, and Cloud9 say, okay, well then we're going to be super proactive with Xin Zhao, Aurora, Kaisa, Jace, and again, just try to snowball the game out of control. This is how you play an aggressive comp in this meta. I'm very passionate about this because we've seen a lot of teams today draft, you know, these more early game, more mid-game focused comps and then basically do nothing with them around these objectives, lose fights around these objectives, but I think Cloud9 actually played this really well. I think they did everything that they were supposed to do, and they didn't allow Team Liquid to get online. So credit to them. Player of the game is pretty obviously going to go to Loki in the mid lane. Really great bounce back game from him, although he was good mechanically in game number 1. I say bounce back because I wasn't a fan of the Azir pick, but, you know, he himself played fine. He was okay in that matchup. This was a really good Aurora game. Felt like he was everywhere he needed to be on the map. He was doing a ridiculous amount of damage. We've seen what that champ can do. When she is played at a super high level, she can take over games in a way that a lot of other champions just can't really do. Loki, I think, really piloted her well, and honestly, Loki's been very impressive to me on Cloud9. He's shown a variety of different styles. He's shown that he can step up when he needs to. You know, I've just been impressed with what he has been able to be for this team. He's a lot more versatile than I think I was giving him credit for when I was doing my LCK Challengers League tape review. He is just a player that I think can come into the league and really be a problem. Like, APA was really good in game 1, and he wasn't like a problem here in game 2 on the R5 Victor, but Loki was better, and honestly, I think Loki has shown that he is more mechanically talented than someone like APA, who has been one of the best mid laners in North America, regardless of what you think of his playstyle over the past couple of years. I think the other player to really shout out here is obviously Thanatos on the top side. Finally, a Jace game where it looks like Jace is actually Jace. And, you know, something I do want to talk about, Rumble has been like the unanimous answer to Jace so far globally. We talk about this a lot in the LCK, where it feels like a lot of teams are just opting in to saying, okay, well, if you're going to play Jace, we're going to play Rumble. We're going to try to get to these team fights. And, you know, I'm going to try to be like an ult bot later on in the game that can take over 5v5. I don't love that idea. Rumble has been super successful into Jace, and, you know, from a idea standpoint, like purely from a neutralizing standpoint, I think Rumble's bad into Jace because I think Jace just exerts too much pressure in terms of these skirmishes. Void Grub should be way too easy to take with Jace as opposed to having a Rumble, at least in my opinion. Like, that should be how things go. Thanatos is like the first top laner I've seen actually try to punish that laning phase, and he was pretty successful at it. Really good game from him. Vulcan had a great game on Rakan. Vulcan has been awesome for the last like year and a half. I think people are just like remembering the bad days of Vulcan, but this guy has like really re-emerged as a top 1 or 2 support in North America. I guess regardless of, you know, what you think of the rest of the league, like he is up there. You know, if you want to put him a little bit lower because players like Core JJ and Ayla and Busio are all really good, it's kind of up to you, but I'm a big fan of Vulcan. Sven continues to concern me. He's really just not been relevant. If you're going to draft Kai'Sa, I would have hoped he would have been more relevant. And Blabber, I don't think dominated this game, although Umti was kind of a disaster on the other side. I think you're kind of thanking your imports, Thanatos and Loki, your 2 solo laners, and Vulcan, to a lesser extent, on the Rakan for setting up a lot of this game. And then for Liquid on the other side, yeah, you invest a lot into scaling. This is something this team really did a lot last year. They played for these 5v5s. They played to try to ignore the early game. They hoped that Jan would be able to win the laning phase on things like Zeri, regardless of the fact that the matchup isn't particularly good, but you just can't really get away with it as much right now. I think the level of the league is better this year at the top at the very least than it was last year, and I think we are kind of seeing that where they were just punished a little bit more in the early game. You know, a lot of this is just Umti running it down. Like, he's gonna get dead of the game. He's just not in good form. Like, there's nothing else left to say. If he was on a bottom tier team, we would be absolutely crucifying his gameplay, but because he's bailed out a lot of the times by the rest of Team Liquid, it honestly is fine. Like, it sometimes in their wins it turns out to be okay, but Umti has just not been good at all so far in 2025, and he was definitely the biggest reason why they lost this game. But Jan and Core not being relevant enough, you know, I think that's kind of up to you to determine whether or not that's like the problem. The Zeri was supposed to be very strong by the mid game here, and it just didn't really happen. Of course, I think Kai'Sa Rakan is just a better bot lane duo than Zeri and Alistar, and, you know, I think we kind of saw that play out. Vulcan was by far the most relevant player in this bot lane, but Jan really wasn't able to get online. APA didn't have any gold at all. Like, he was playing really scared and really passive. It's kind of what we've learned from APA, is that he's going to try and scale it out into the late game. And if you have someone like Loki that is going to be very aggro in a lot of these skirmishes and moving around the map, like, that's ideal. You know, APA looked good on the Talia when he was gifted a good lane matchup. On the Victor, it was basically the opposite. So certainly something to monitor. Impacted a lot of damage, but he also put himself in bad positions. And once again, I am critical of the Rumble counter pick onto Jace. I think that that is a pretty punishable lane, even if we haven't really seen that happen at the pro level. So for Liquid, again, I think it's just investing too much into trying to be safe, into trying to be, you know, inevitable, if you will, in the back half of these games, and it's just not really working out. For Cloud9, this is exactly what you want to see out of a team that wants to draft for priority, that wants to draft to be able to control the game themselves and not rely on the enemy team not pushing their advantage enough. So we're going to game 3. Obviously, both of these teams have their own styles. I think Cloud9 looked better in game 2 than Team Liquid looked in game 1, at least in my opinion. So I'm still going into game 3 expecting a Cloud9 victory, but Team Liquid could absolutely take it. It's a best of 1 at this point. The winner of this game moves on to take on 100 Thieves in the finals, and the loser is eliminated. Who's going to be able to take it? Well, the winner of game number 3 was Team Liquid, they are going to take game number 3. They are going to take this series 2-1, and we have our second kind of upset of the day here with Team Liquid moving on to the finals and Cloud9 going out in the semifinals. Definitely not the result I expected, especially after game 2 where it felt like Cloud9 just kind of had a better idea of what their win condition was and a better idea of where they wanted to go with a lot of their resources, but alas, here we are, Team Liquid moving forward. Obviously, congratulations to them. I think they played really well in this game, and I think they played definitely better than Cloud9. I'm still salty that these are best of 3s and not best of 5s because I think a best of 5 for both of these series would have been really fun to watch, but hopefully we get more of those later on in the year. There's a lot to talk about when it comes to both of these teams, but yet another example of a team with a lot of control in the early game, a lot of ways to manipulate and facilitate their win condition into being easier. Like, they win the 5v5s later on in the game. Cloud9 really has to play the map well in order to be able to succeed here. I think they have to be able to get some early gold onto Wukong and Ahri. Like, that is a very essential part of their win condition, but also their win condition's way harder because I think not only does Team Liquid have a bunch of individual matchups that I really like Ezreal into Ziggs. I think that should be perma-prio for Ezreal. Hui into Ahri is something where, like, Ahri doesn't have as much shove power against a champion like Hui to be able to move around the map in the way that you would want. Lilia into Wukong really opens up basically this entire game for Team Liquid. This is a fantastic Lilia pick for Umti, and I think that he was very essential here. It's not like Aatrox can punish the Scion. Like, you're looking at a lot of these situations and you're saying, well, Cloud9 kind of has to be able to snowball this game. They have to be able to hold a lot of the tempo in their hands, but Team Liquid has a lot of ways to not lose, like to actually gain advantages early on in this game, and then they also probably scale better going into the late game. It's just not a situation where I felt like Cloud9 was going to have an easy time being able to win, and the moment they did start losing early on, like, this game was over. There was no way for them to be able to get back in. Their window was much smaller than Team Liquid's on the other side of this, and, to Team Liquid's credit, they played phenomenal, and I'm gonna go a little bit off the beaten path here, but player of the game and player of the series for me is gonna go to APA in the mid lane. I really thought he was awesome on this way. I thought his positioning was, like, really exceptional. He was really, really great throughout this entire game. I know sometimes we give him a lot of criticism for being too passive in the early game, for not being a great laner. All of those things are, to an extent true. Like, I think he survives at the North American level because there aren't a lot of players that can punish him in that way, but he is a great team fighter, and when you do get him into that stage of the game, like, he can look incredibly good, and honestly, throughout a lot of the skirmishes in this game, APA looked phenomenal, and I actually just thought he was great throughout this series. The Taliyah game in game number 1 was solid. He certainly wasn't the problem on Victor in game number 2. I just think he played well. I honestly think he looked really good and looked like the most relevant player for Team Liquid, although if you did want to give it to Jan, I totally understand. This dude is an absolute damage monster. He's so aggressive. He's so willing to step up and punish bad matchups for Cloud9, and that's exactly what they opted themselves into. He's always been phenomenal on Ezreal, and this was a really great Ezreal game. Really took over, much better than what we saw in that previous series out of Masu. I will continue to die on the hill that Jan is probably the best AD carry in North America, and that he will continue to be the best AD carry in North America, that this is the best bot lane in North America, and it really paid dividends here. Core was excellent in this series as well. Impact goes deathless on Scion, not even bothering to use the passive. Who even cares? Let's just win this top lane 1v1 matchup and make Aatrox completely useless throughout this game. Sure, why not? Umti was fine on the Lilia. This is a fantastic matchup for Lilia. This is like a draft mega gap here. Wukong has a really hard time playing into that champion, and it really does neutralize a lot of the early game advantages that Cloud9 is supposed to have. Umti does a great job at being able to push that, but it was the carry duo and Core JJ to a lesser extent that I think really stood out for me. APA and Jan were the stars for Team Liquid in this series, and honestly, they've kind of been the stars for Team Liquid so far in 2025. Good stuff from them. And then for Cloud9 on the other side, you just gotta be a bit frustrated, quite frankly, because not only were you supposed to win this series, but I don't really know what this draft was here in game number 3. I would definitely be frustrated if I was a Cloud9 fan, just looking at this and saying, okay, so our win condition is like Wukong and Ahri just like hopefully teaming up and being able to win, these mid-game skirmishes. It's something he's talked about, like mid-game skirmishes are so important, but Wukong can't really play all that aggro in the early game because Lilia is just kind of better in that stage, and so it's difficult for him to be able to punish that. He doesn't have a great matchup into Lilia in general, and so when you're looking around, if Lilia is going to play aggro, then all of a sudden Aatrox can't punish Scion, the Ahri certainly can't shove and roam and punish the Hui too much, and Ziggs isn't going to be able to punish the Ezreal really at all, and so where exactly are you supposed to be getting this mid-game advantage that you can use to win these objective fights? Because it's just non-existent. I think this is a really hard game to win for Cloud9, and they didn't win it. I honestly would be a bit frustrated if I was a Cloud9 fan by this situation. Dud of the game could go to quite a few players. I think it's got to go to Thanatos for me because that Aatrox truly was irrelevant. I think it could go to Loki on the Ahri, who wasn't particularly good. Theoretically, it could go to Blabber or Vulcan. Even if I don't think their bad plays were their fault, Sven was very inactive throughout the series and quite frankly was just outclassed by Jan, who is a better AD carry on the other side of this. You can point to quite a few members of Cloud9 just not playing well, but this really was like a team effort loss and a team comp loss in game number 3. They put themselves into a pretty big hole and they couldn't quite dig themselves out of it. I do not like this draft and I think it came back to really bite them, but they're unfortunately out of the tournament now. They're done. They're going to be waiting on the spring split, and this is so reminiscent of 2024 where it's like you have all these expectations, you played fine enough in the quote-unquote regular season and you go into the playoffs and just can't quite get it done. Obviously, it's a bit of a different situation because these are best of 3s and it's single elimination. You can't drop a single series at all, and so we don't know what would have happened if this team had more time to level up. Like Team Liquid and FlyQuest, they played more games domestically than the others, and so you just don't really know. It's hard to get such a big grasp with such a small sample size, but this is definitely another disappointing defeat for a team that I think has higher expectations than this. And for Team Liquid on the other side, you know, they look good here in this series. I think that this is probably the best that they have looked so far this year. Hopefully they can keep it up. APA and Jan look like they're in really good form. Jan in particular is just playing on an MVP level pace right now. This guy looks like an absolute superstar in the AD carry role, like best player in NA type of superstar for them right now. If APA can keep this form up, if Core can keep this form up, and if can just survive in the jungle in that matchup against 100 Thieves, I'm honestly excited to see if Team Liquid can repeat their performance from the previous first split last year and kind of surprise everybody to win the split. But that's going to bring us to my finals preview now, and that's going to be up on the screen now. Some of you might have seen the finals preview for the LCK that, of course, we did. I'm bringing this back for the big final series. Maybe we bring it back for more moving into the future, moving into spring, moving into summer, but I wanted to give the finals the preview it actually deserved because it's the only best of 5 that we are getting in the LTA for the entirety of the winter split. Genuinely an absurd format that we are in, but let's go ahead and preview the matchup, of course, between the number 1 seeded 100 Thieves and the number 4 seeded Team Liquid. This is a very fun one on paper. These two teams have already faced off this year, as you can see in the middle. 100 Thieves was able to win that best of 3 2-1. That moved them on, of course, to taking on Cloud9 and beating them in a best of 1 to qualify as the number 1 seed, but Team Liquid's not the same team that they were in that series, and that certainly brings up a very interesting conversation. I think both of these teams are actually built relatively similarly, and I think you can look at a couple of very key matchups that are really going to determine who comes out on top in this one. I think 100 Thieves have 2 roles that they are, pretty clearly better in my opinion, and I think Team Liquid have 2 roles that they are clearly better in my opinion. I think when you're looking at this, I think the middle of the map should be in favor of 100 Thieves. I think when you look at River and Quid versus and APA, I would expect 100 Thieves to have a pretty big advantage between those two, and so I think that's really positive. I think being able to move around the map, being able to control the tempo of the game, a lot of that happens through mid lane right now, and if Quid is just going to be better and specifically more aggressive than APA early on in these games, I think that is going to be a major positive for 100 Thieves moving forward. Of course, he's been willing to play a lot more assassins, a lot of these melee carries. He's very good on those champs. APA a lot more willing to play a lot of these control mages. Again, if he's just going to give over a lot of these more aggressive resources, I think Quid is going to be in a great spot, and I do think he's the best player in North America, even if Jan is very much giving him a run for his money. And also, River is just better than I think we can say that with pretty heavy certainty. Both of them are going to be flexing a lot more into facilitators, and so I'm not going to expect this jungle matchup to be super dominated one side or the other, but if is making a lot of mistakes in the mid game, like River's just not going to do that on the side of 100 Thieves, and that's why I think that's in favor of them. But then you look at top lane and bot lane, and I think that is in favor of Team Liquid, in my opinion. Maybe controversially so. Top lane definitely not. Impact is a player that I would expect to be better than Sniper, even with Sniper coming off of a really good series win over Whippo, where he probably just had the best, big best of 3 he's ever played. This was a really defining series, I think, for Sniper, and if he's going to be able to carry that form over against Impact, who I think has been worse than Whippo so far this year, or maybe at least a different player than Whippo so far this year, that's going to be ginormous. But if Impact can come out and just, dominate Sniper, I'm really not going to be surprised by that. And then bot lane, this I have in favor of Team Liquid. I think Yeon and Core are the best bot lane in North America, even if FBI and Ayla are really hot right now. Yeon is just a player that I'm not counting out under any circumstance. As much as I love FBI, like Yeon is just a different beast in terms of the mechanics he can put out. I think he's on a different level than every other AD carry in North America in terms of my expectations. And, you know, I think Core is better than Ayla as well. And it's really going to be interesting. Obviously, Yeon and Core are very familiar with Ayla individually as a player. You know, Yeon playing with Ayla and Core training Ayla for quite a long time. So it's going to be a fun matchup. And if FBI can like really gain an advantage in the bot lane, if he can pop off and have a great series, like that's how 100 Thieves beat Team Liquid the first time, is that FBI was just better than Yeon. And if that's the case, then 100 Thieves is going to win this series. But if Yeon is really great and if Impact is able to win on the top side, even if APA is like able to survive, like that's how I think Team Liquid is able to win this series. And so I kind of have this as a 50-50. It's a very difficult series to decide who is going to be big favorites in, because I think Team Liquid's playing better than they normally would, but 100 Thieves has definitely looked better in 2025. If I had to slightly lean in favor of someone, I'm slightly leaning in favor of Team Liquid. I'm so sorry, 100 Thieves fans. It's genuinely like a 51-49, but if you wanted to call this a 50-50, like, be my guest. That is, like, super fair. If Quid is the best player on the Rift, then I think 100 Thieves wins. If Yeon is the best player on the Rift, then I think Team Liquid wins. I really do think it comes down to that. So, very intrigued to see how things go, but I don't think we could have gotten a more evenly matched and more interesting finals if we tried. Alright, but that is going to do it for my LTA Winter Playoffs Semifinals overview and analysis video. We know our final two teams going into the finals. We just previewed it, 100 Thieves and Team Liquid. I'm super excited to see which one of those teams is going to represent the LTA at first stand. I think both would be very worthy representatives. 100 Thieves has really defined a lot of what this winter split has been so far, and Team Liquid is one of the highest upside teams that we have, with a lot of the players that I think represent North America the best. Players like APA and Yeon are always very fun to have on the international stage, let alone like Core JJ and Impact, who have been staples. And, you know, if ends up winning the split, that's certainly a fun narrative considering. So, you know, a lot of storylines going into the finals. I'm excited. I hope you guys are as well. But let me know who you think is going to win that series down in the comments section below. Of course, I think it's close to a 50-50. Do you disagree? Do you think one team should be heavily favored over the others? Or do you think it's as even as I'm making it out to be? Always curious to hear your thoughts and opinions down below. But that's gonna do it. I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. It lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button. Of course, we will be covering the LTA finals, but it's double upload day. We're gonna be uploading the first round of the LPL playoffs as well here today, so stick around for that. If you're interested in content about the LEC or the LCK, we're of course covering those regions as well. And first stand's right around the corner. We'll be covering every single game of that tournament on this channel in the same vein. So if you're interested in that stuff, hit subscribe and hit that bell so you can be notified when those videos do go live. But of course, with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all